The projector was still warm when the applause started. The screen behind my team lead showed lines of code scrolling slowly, methodically, like evidence in a courtroom. Clean functions, elegant solutions. The kind of code that takes months to write and seconds to admire. My team lead, a man named Kyle Brennan, stood at the front of the conference room with his hands in his pockets, smiling like this moment belonged to him. He gestured casually toward the screen, where my variable names and my logic patterns were displayed for everyone to see. "This solution," he said, his voice confident and steady, "is what saved the product. It's why we're ready to scale. It's why the investors are here today." The room erupted in applause. Polite at first, then genuine, filling the space with sound that felt both validating and suffocating. I sat 3 rows back, hands folded in my lap, jaw tight, watching my work get renamed in real time. Kyle called it my solution. He said I built this. He talked about the technical challenges he had overcome, the late nights he had spent debugging, the creative thinking that had led to the breakthrough. And nobody questioned him. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. Not embarrassment, anger. The kind that sits low in your chest and burns quietly, the kind you can't show in a room full of people who are clapping for someone else. The investors sat in the front row, nodding, taking notes, their expressions impressed. Our CEO, a woman named Adrienne Cole, sat beside them, smiling, clearly pleased with what she was seeing. Kyle was delivering exactly what she wanted: confidence, competence, a narrative of innovation that made the company look strong. And I was sitting in the back, invisible, watching the person who had done nothing but manage my schedule take credit for 6 months of my life. My hands stayed folded. My face stayed neutral. But inside, something sharp and cold was settling into place. I had known this was coming. I had prepared for it. And now, sitting in that room, watching Kyle bask in applause that should have been mine, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not panic. Clarity. The applause faded. Kyle moved on to the next slide, talking about timelines and scalability and future features. The investors asked questions. Kyle answered them smoothly, referencing architecture decisions I had made, optimization strategies I had implemented, debugging processes I had developed over weeks of trial and error. He spoke with authority, with ease, like the work had always been his. And nobody in that room, not the investors, not the CEO, not the other engineers sitting around me, said a word to correct him. Because nobody else knew. Nobody else had been in the code base. Nobody else understood what had actually happened behind the scenes. Except me. And except the version control system that had recorded every single line of code I had written, every commit I had made, every timestamp that proved exactly who had built what and when. I glanced down at my laptop, which sat closed on my lap. Inside that machine was a file, a commit, a single, carefully prepared piece of evidence that I had been holding onto for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment to use it. The moment had arrived. My name is Beatrice Brown. I'm 29 years old, and I had been working as a backend engineer at Apex Innovations for just over 18 months. And this moment, this theft, this casual erasure of my work in front of the people whose opinions mattered most, wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was the culmination of a pattern that had started the day I joined Kyle's team and had grown bolder with every project, every sprint, every feature I delivered. Kyle had learned, over the course of a year and a half, that he could take credit for my work without consequence, that I wouldn't fight back, that I would stay quiet, keep my head down, and let him rewrite history as long as it kept the project moving forward. He had been right about that, for a long time, but sitting in that conference room, watching him smile and gesture and lie with perfect confidence, I realized something that felt almost like relief. I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore, not because I was angry, but because I had built something that couldn't be talked around, and I was about to show it to everyone in that room. To understand how I got to that moment, you have to go back about 16 months. That was when I first joined the engineering team at Apex Innovations, a mid-sized tech company that built enterprise software for supply chain management. I came in as a senior backend engineer, a role that sounded important but really meant I spent most of my time fixing other people's mistakes and building the infrastructure nobody else wanted to touch. I was good at it. I had the degree, the experience, the technical skills. But I was quiet. I didn't promote my work in Slack channels. I didn't send company-wide updates when I closed a ticket. I just solved problems, committed code, and moved on to the next task. Kyle Brennan was my team lead. He had been at Apex for 3 years, and he had a reputation for being a strong communicator and a strategic thinker. People liked him. Leadership trusted him. And in the beginning, I thought he was competent enough. He assigned clear tasks. He gave reasonable deadlines. He seemed to understand the product. What I didn't realize at first was that Kyle's strength wasn't in building things. It was in positioning himself. Kyle had a way of framing work that made him sound visionary while keeping me invisible. In sprint planning meetings, he would say things like, "We're going to tackle the API optimization this quarter," or "I'm focusing on the authentication layer next." Words that sounded collaborative but weren't. Because what he really meant was, Beatrice is going to do this, and I'm going to present it. He would assign me the hardest back-end work, the kind of problems that required deep technical knowledge, hours of debugging, and solutions that weren't found in documentation. Data pipeline optimization, performance bottlenecks, complex database migrations, the work that was critical but invisible, the work that made everything else run smoothly but never showed up in demos. And I would do it. I would solve the problem, write clean code, document the solution, and commit it to the repository with clear, descriptive messages. And then Kyle would mention it in the next all-hands meeting as something we achieved or something the team delivered. My name was never attached. The first time I saved a failing feature, nobody knew it was me. It was about 4 months into my time at Apex. We were 3 weeks away from launching a major update to our flagship product, and one of the core features, a real-time inventory tracking system, was completely broken. The data wasn't syncing correctly. Queries were timing out. The front end was displaying stale information that made the entire feature useless. Kyle had been assigned to fix it. He spent a week trying different approaches, none of which worked. The deadline was approaching fast, and panic was starting to set in among the leadership team. That's when Kyle came to my desk late on a Thursday afternoon and said, very quietly, "I need your help with this." I looked at the code base. I identified the problem, a poorly optimized join query that was creating a cascading performance failure. I rewrote the entire data access layer, implemented caching, and restructured the API calls. It took me 3 nights of work. By Monday morning, the feature was working flawlessly. Kyle presented it in the stand-up meeting as a breakthrough he had achieved over the weekend. I said nothing. In meetings, my contributions were summarized in ways that made them sound smaller than they were. Kyle would say things like, "Beatrice helped with some of the back-end work," or "Beatrice supported the optimization effort." Helped. Supported. Words that implied assistance rather than authorship. And slowly, over months, those summaries began to shift. Beatrice helped became the team worked on. Beatrice supported became we implemented. My name started disappearing from the narrative entirely, replaced by vague, collective language that made it impossible to know who had actually done what. I didn't fight it. I didn't correct him in meetings. I told myself it didn't matter as long as the work was good, as long as the product was improving, as long as I was building skills and gaining experience. But the work wasn't being seen. An experience without recognition doesn't lead anywhere. It just keeps you in the same place while other people climb past you. The first time I noticed my name was missing from a slide deck, I thought it was an oversight. It was a quarterly review presentation that Kyle was giving to the executive team. The slide listed the major technical achievements from the past 3 months. I had led 2 of the 5 projects on that list, a database migration that improved query performance by 40% and a new API endpoint that reduced server response times by half. The slide showed the achievements. It showed the impact metrics, but it didn't show any individual names. Just engineering team, Q2 highlights. I asked Kyle about it afterward, keeping my tone light. I noticed the presentation didn't have contributor names. Should I send you a list for next time? He smiled. Nah, leadership prefers high-level summaries. They don't need that level of detail. High-level summaries. I nodded. I thanked him, and I walked back to my desk, feeling that familiar cold weight settle in my chest. I started documenting everything after that. Not out of paranoia, out of practicality. I had learned, over months of watching my work disappear into Kyle's presentations, that in a place like this, your contributions only mattered if you could prove them. And proof required more than memory. It required records. I began writing detailed commit messages for every piece of code I pushed to the repository. Not just fixed bug or updated function. Full descriptions, what the problem was, what the solution did, why I chose that approach. I included timestamps. I referenced ticket numbers. I made sure that anyone looking at the version history could see exactly who had written what and when. I also started keeping a personal log. A simple document where I tracked every task Kyle assigned me, every solution I delivered, every feature I built. Dates, descriptions, links to commits. Clean, organized, factual. I didn't tell anyone I was doing this. I just did it, quietly, in the background, while I kept building. My commit messages became a form of documentation that couldn't be erased. Every function I wrote, every optimization I implemented, every bug I fixed, it all went into the repository with my name attached, my timestamp recorded, and a clear explanation of what I had done. Kyle never looked at commit histories. He didn't need to. He trusted that nobody else would either. And for a long time, he was right. Nobody checked. Nobody questioned. The code worked, the product shipped, and Kyle got the credit in meetings while I got nothing in writing. Except I did have it in writing. It was just buried in places most people didn't look. In the repository logs. In the version control system. In the metadata that every engineer knew existed but most non-technical people never thought to examine. I was building a trail. A clean, undeniable trail. And I was doing it because I had learned, over a year of watching Kyle operate, that confrontation didn't work. But facts did. The turning point came about 5 months ago when Kyle assigned me the flagship feature. It was the centerpiece of our next product release, a predictive analytics engine that would allow clients to forecast inventory needs based on historical data and market trends. It was technically complex. It required machine learning integration, real-time data processing, and an API that could handle thousands of requests per second without breaking. And it was the feature that investors cared about most. Kyle called me into a conference room and closed the door. "This one's critical, Beatrice," he said. "I need you to build the entire backend. Full ownership. You design it. You implement it. You test it." I looked at him, waiting for the catch. "You'll present it?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not this time. This is your project. You own it." I didn't believe him, but I didn't argue. I just said okay and went back to my desk. And for the next 5 months, I built that feature from the ground up. I worked late every night. I worked weekends. I built the data pipeline, designed the machine learning models, optimized the API endpoints, and stress tested the entire system until it could handle 10 times the expected load without slowing down. The pressure was immense. This feature was the reason investors were interested in Apex. If it failed, the company's growth plans would stall. If it succeeded, would be positioned as a leader in predictive supply chain technology. There was no middle ground. Kyle checked in occasionally. He asked for status updates. He reviewed my progress in our weekly one-on-ones. But he didn't interfere. He didn't rewrite anything. He let me work. And for a while, I thought maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time, when the feature launched, my name would be attached to it. Maybe this time, I would get the recognition I had earned. I was wrong. I finished the feature 2 weeks ahead of schedule. It worked flawlessly. The machine learning predictions were accurate within a 5% margin. The API handled stress tests without breaking. The real-time data processing was faster than anything we had built before. I was proud of it, genuinely proud. It was the best code I had ever written. I documented everything. I wrote a technical overview explaining how the system worked. I created diagrams showing the data flow. I prepared a demo walkthrough that could be used for client presentations. And I sent it all to Kyle with a simple message, feature complete, ready for review. He replied 2 hours later, looks great. Let's schedule the investor demo for next month. I'll handle the presentation. I stayed at that message for a long time. I'll handle the presentation. Not we'll present together. Not you should walk them through it. I'll handle it. And I knew, in that moment, exactly what was about to happen. 3 weeks before the investor demo, I saw the presentation deck for the first time. Kyle had built it himself, pulling screenshots from the system, copying metrics from my technical documentation, and creating slides that explained how the feature worked. The deck was polished, professional, clear, and my name wasn't on it. Not in the title slide. Not in the contributors section. Not anywhere. The deck referred to the engineering team in generic terms. It highlighted Kyle's role as technical lead and solution architect. But the person who had actually built the feature, who had written every line of code, designed every algorithm, solved every problem, was invisible. I didn't confront him. I didn't send an angry email. I just opened my laptop, navigated to the repository, and began preparing something Kyle would never see coming. A commit. A single, carefully crafted commit that would sit in my local branch, unpushed, waiting for the exact right moment to go live. The commit was simple. It didn't add new code. It didn't change functionality. It was purely documentation, a detailed README file that explained the entire feature architecture, listed every major component, and included attribution for every section. Specifically, it included my name, clearly, repeatedly, with timestamps. The commit message was equally clear, final documentation and authorship record for predictive analytics engine. Primary architect and developer, Beatrice Brown. Implementation period, January, May. Full commit history available in repository logs. I wrote it carefully. I reviewed it 3 times. And then I saved it locally, staged but not pushed, waiting in my Git client like a loaded weapon. I would only push it if I needed to. If Kyle presented the work honestly, if he acknowledged my contributions, if he did the right thing in front of the investors, I would never need to use it. But if he didn't, I would have one chance to correct the record. And I would take it. Investor Day arrived on a Tuesday morning in early June. The conference room was packed. 8 investors, all dressed in business formal, sat in the front 2 rows. Our CEO, Adrienne, sat beside them, along with the CFO and 2 board members. The rest of the engineering team filled the remaining seats, along with people from sales, marketing, and product management. Kyle stood at the front, confident and relaxed, his laptop connected to the projector. He opened with a brief overview of the company's growth trajectory, then transitioned smoothly into the technical presentation. "What I'm about to show you," he said, "is the breakthrough that's going to define our next phase." The screen filled with the first slide, and my stomach dropped, because the slide, in bold letters, read, "Predictive Analytics Engine, designed and built by Kyle Brennan, technical lead." I sat 3 rows back, my laptop balanced on my knees, my hands resting lightly on the keyboard. And I waited. Kyle walked through the feature with perfect confidence. He explained the architecture as if he had designed it. He described the machine learning models as if he had built them. He talked about the optimization challenges as if he had solved them. And the investors listened, nodding, impressed. One of them asked about scalability. Kyle answered smoothly, referencing load tests I had run and performance benchmarks I had documented. Another asked about accuracy rates. Kyle quoted the numbers I had calculated, explaining the validation process I had implemented. He knew the material. He had studied my work thoroughly, but he hadn't done the work. And that difference mattered. Adrienne smiled, clearly pleased with how the presentation was going. The investors exchanged approving glances, and Kyle, sensing their satisfaction, grew even more confident. "This solution," he said, turning back to the screen where my code was still scrolling, "is what saved the product. It's why we're ready to scale. It's why you're here today." That's when I opened my laptop. I logged into the repository quietly, my fingers moving across the keyboard with the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly what you're about to do. I navigated to my local branch. I reviewed the commit one final time, the README file, the attribution, the timestamps. Everything was clean, clear, undeniable. Kyle was still talking, still gesturing toward the screen, still taking credit for work he hadn't done. And I made a decision. I pushed the commit. The command executed silently. No sound, no notification. Just a quiet update to the repository that would propagate across the system within seconds. On my screen, the commit log refreshed, showing my new entry at the top of the history. And I waited for someone to notice. It took less than a minute. One of the investors, a man named Colin Hargrove who I knew had a technical background, had pulled up the repository on his own laptop. He was following along with Kyle's presentation, checking the code in real time. I watched his screen from 3 rows back. I saw the moment the repository refreshed. I saw the new commit appear at the top of the log. And I saw his expression change. He stopped scrolling. He clicked on the commit. He read the message. Then he looked up at Kyle, his brow furrowed slightly. "Kyle," he said, interrupting mid-sentence. "Why did the repository history just change?" The room went quiet. Kyle turned, his confident smile faltering just slightly. "I'm sorry." "The commit log," Colin said, turning his laptop so others could see. "There's a new entry from about 30 seconds ago. Authored by..." He paused, reading the screen. "Beatrice Brown." Every head in the room turned toward me. Not all at once. Slowly, in waves, as people processed what Colin had just said. Kyle's face had gone pale. He looked at me, then at Colin's screen, then back at me. "That's just documentation," he said quickly. "Beatrice handles some of the technical record-keeping." Colin wasn't looking at Kyle anymore. He was reading the commit message, his eyes moving across the text with the kind of focus that comes from recognizing something important. "This says she's the primary architect and developer," Colin said, his voice calm but pointed. "It says the implementation period was January through May." He looked up at Kyle. "Your slide says you designed and built this." The room had gone completely silent. Adrienne leaned forward, her expression shifting from pleased to confused. Another investor pulled up the repository on her own device. And Kyle opened his mouth, but no words came out. Colin clicked through to the full commit history. The screen filled with entries, hundreds of them, spanning 5 months, each one authored by me, each one timestamped and documented with clear, detailed messages. Functions I had written, algorithms I had designed, bugs I had fixed. Every single piece of the feature, laid out in chronological order, with my name attached to every line. "This shows over 300 commits," Colin said, still scrolling. "All authored by Beatrice Brown. All between January and May." He looked at Kyle. "Where are your commits?" Kyle's jaw tightened. I was overseeing the project, providing strategic direction. My role wasn't in the day-to-day implementation. "But you just told us you built this," Colin said. His voice wasn't accusatory. It was simply factual. "You said, quote, I designed and built the predictive analytics engine." The silence that followed was absolute. Adrienne stood up, her expression no longer confused but sharp. "Kyle, can you explain this?" Kyle tried. He talked about oversight and leadership and how technical leads don't always write code directly. He talked about collaboration and team efforts and how contributions get distributed across multiple people. But the more he talked, the weaker his explanations sounded, because the evidence was right there, on the screen, visible to everyone in the room. Colin wasn't the only one looking at the repository now. 2 other investors had pulled it up. One of the board members was scrolling through my commit messages, reading the detailed descriptions I had written for each change. And Adrienne was looking at me. "Beatrice," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Is this accurate? Did you build this feature?" I met her eyes. "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." She turned back to Kyle. "We need to talk. Privately. Now." The meeting ended there. No formal conclusion. No polite wrap-up. Just a quiet, tense dissolution as people gathered their things and filed out of the room, whispering. The fallout was swift. Kyle was placed on administrative leave that afternoon. By the end of the week, an internal review had been launched, examining not just the predictive analytics project but every major feature Kyle had claimed credit for over the past 2 years. The review found a pattern. Project after project where my commits dominated the repository history, where my name appeared in the version control logs but nowhere in Kyle's presentations. The documentation was undeniable. 3 weeks later, Kyle was let go. Not for a single act of theft, but for a sustained pattern of misrepresenting contributions and taking credit for work he hadn't done. Adrienne called me into her office the day the review concluded. "I owe you an apology," she said. "This should never have happened. We should have been paying closer attention." I nodded but didn't say anything. "We'd like to promote you to technical lead," she continued. "Effective immediately. And we want to make sure your contributions are recognized moving forward." I thanked her, but I had already made a different decision. 2 months later, I accepted an offer from a competitor. The role was senior, the pay was better, and the company had a reputation for valuing engineers who actually built things, not just the people who knew how to present them. On my last day at Apex, Adrienne walked me out. "I wish you were staying," she said, "but I understand why you're not." I thought about that as I left the building for the last time. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't confronted Kyle in the meeting. I hadn't made accusations or demanded justice. I had simply pushed one commit. One carefully prepared, perfectly timed piece of evidence that spoke louder than anything I could have said. And the truth had done the rest. 6 months into my new role, I was leading a team of my own, building features that had my name on them from the start. And when people asked me how I had ended up there, I told them the truth. I documented my work. I kept clean records. And when the moment came, I let the evidence speak. Because the most powerful thing you can do isn't argue. It's build something so well documented, so clearly attributed, so undeniably yours, that no one can take it away, no matter how hard they try. And if they do try, all you need is one commit, one moment, one carefully timed push that makes the truth impossible to ignore. That's not revenge. That's just version control.